Personal defense weapon ballistics that lie outside the normal things we would think about, the normal parameters, like a longer than normal 9mm barrel and ballistics, or a shorter than normal 223 barrel and ballistics. What about 5.7? That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life, PDW, ballistics, and thoughts. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, the right way with God Almighty at the center, biblical, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world firsthand experience. I'm blessed to serve you as host, military, law enforcement, private security, contracting, competition shooting, other stuff in the background, bullet points in the show notes. Today, we're going to talk about PDWs, and I've talked about PDWs before, did an episode recently, but today I'm talking about PDW ballistics because they may differ from your ordinary ballistics. And I say may because they may not. If you carry like a full-size fighting handgun, and then you're getting something like a SIG Flux Raider that's basically a handgun with a brace, you're basically going to get the same ballistics. It may increase your shootability, but the ballistics are going to be the same. But if you're going with a PDW with a longer barrel, a 9mm with a longer barrel, then you're going to gain some velocity. Does that mean increased performance? Maybe less. How is that possible? Well, we'll get into that. And we might as well get into it now. Let's start with the 9mm. In general, most people are, I hope, carrying a gun with at least a 4-inch barrel, but a 4, 5-inch barrel, 5 being at like the maximum. But a full-size fighting handgun, somewhere in the 4 to 5-inch range, I'm hoping. That's what we're going to consider the baseline today. We're not going to talk about little baby hashtag Me Too, pocket fantastic plastic things. Talking about fighting handguns versus a PDW. Because a PDW should be more firepower than one of these things. Now let's look at some numbers here. Let's look at some numbers on 9mm and a longer barrel. And a lot of this I'm going to get from Ballistics by the Inch. This is a site that's been around quite a while. If you're not familiar with it, been around a long, long time. You can tell by looking at it. It looks like one of the early web pages because it's been around a long time. Okay, if we look at 9mm. If we look at 9mm in a 5-inch barrel with something like a Spear Gold Dot 124 grain, which is a pretty vanilla run-of-the-mill load. 5 inches, you're looking at $12.59. If we go up to a 10-inch barrel, you're looking at $13.38. It is a gain. It's not a significant gain. It's, 1,200 something to 1,300 and something. Okay, it's more velocity. Is that better? Well, it depends. Because if you're talking about good hollow point expanding ammunition, which I encourage you to carry, they've done a lot of work in 9mm to make sure that you have a good balance of expansion versus penetration. It's a balancing act, right? If you just wanted penetration, you'd shoot a full metal jacket. If you just wanted expansion, you'd shoot a frangible bullet. But you want that good balance, which we've kind of settled on as the industry standard between 12 and 16 inches. If the bullet expands too rapidly, you won't get the amount of penetration. And if it doesn't expand, you'll get far more penetration, which can be bad if you've got one, it can be bad because you're not dumping as much energy in the target. 9mm is not a rifle round. It's limited in energy anyway, somewhere around 400 foot-pounds for a hot load. If you get too much expansion, you don't get enough penetration. And if you get not enough expansion, you get the opposite. So you want to balance that. If you start going outside normal parameters, that ammo may or may not work well. So it may not just be the case that because you get more power that you get more performance. It may not be a 1-to-1 ratio there. That's something to be aware of. And I'm going to try and do this episode without throwing out a bunch of numbers because I know a lot of people, unless you're a ballistics nerd, which I am, but unless you are that, your eyes just might gloss over and just numbers, bullet grain, weight, velocity, foot-pounds, blah, blah, blah. And you may not care. So I'm going to try and keep it, entertaining and relevant. We look at another comparison, which is one of my favorite things, which is 147 grains in a 9mm. We look at just over 1,000 for a federal 147 grain. And again, this is ballistics by the inch, and we go to 1,067 for a 10-inch barrel. Not much gain there going to that barrel. Okay, so it looks like in 9mm, in a P.D.W, I would consider around a 10-inch barrel. If you're going to like a 16-inch barrel, that's more of like a full-size pistol caliber carbine, not what I would call a personal defense weapon. I would say you're probably looking at 10 inches around there. Maybe it's 11, right? Maybe it's 12, but 10 or less probably in a P.D.W in 9mm. So not a significant gain in power or velocity. But what about if we're talking about 223? 223 is one of the other main things you're going to see in PDWs, like an AR with a brace, with a shorter barrel. Call it a 10, 11, 12-inch barrel. For that, we're going to compare the normal, right? What would I consider the normal? And you could have made the argument a decade ago that the normal would have been a 20-inch barrel, but in today's day and age, probably your normal and a 223 is going to be your 16-inch barrel, right? So let's look at that. If we look at a 55 grain, this is, again, ballistics by the inch, Remington UMC. 55 grain, if we're looking at a 16-inch, we're looking at 29.43 feet per second. Night and day difference of velocity between that and the 9mm. Well, what if we go down to that 10-inch barrel? Then you're looking at 26.16. Before in the 9mm, we're looking at, a difference of maybe less than 100 feet a second. Now we're looking at several hundred feet a second difference. We're looking at, again, 29.43 versus 26.16. Now, if we look at an even shorter barrel, it starts to get noticeable, right? If we were to do something like a 6-inch barrel, we're going from 29.83 down to 20.41. That's a significant drop off. Now, I would tell you, if you're going with the classic direct impingement 223, I would encourage you to stay between a 11.5, 12.5 inch barrel, because those systems are pretty well proven. You've still got your carbine length gas system, which is proven. You've got enough barrel after the gas system to have reliable function and pressure. You may or may not get reliability if you go shorter than that. But there are several PDWs available in 223 that are shorter than that, so I thought I would throw in the ballistics. Again, 16-inch for a 55 grain bullet listed here for Remington, of Remington load, ballistics by the inch. 16-inch, 29.43, 10-inch, 26.16, and a 6-inch, 20.41. You really start to get to a diminishing return really quickly with that round, which, again, was originally designed for like a 20-inch barrel. But it does fairly decent down to a 10-inch barrel, if I'm being honest. Okay, there is another, right? How about the FN 57x28? Now, I didn't get this one from Ballistics by the Inch. Why? Because that website is so old, they don't have 5.7 on there, as it wasn't real common then. But if we look at 5.7x28, which is a PDW round designed for a PDW, designed for the PS90. If we look at loads listed by FN, kind of their standard FN load is a 40 grain. They list a 40 grain Hornady VMAX, which is a real common load. And it lists for the 5.7 pistol a velocity of 17.38. And it lists for the PS90 a velocity of 20.34. There's right around almost exactly 300 feet per second difference in a pistol versus a PDW. And I believe the PS90, the actual PS90, has a 10-inch barrel. So there you go. And that's a real common loading. Now, I must point out those numbers. That's a 40 grain bullet compared to the 5.56, which we went with a 55 grain bullet. And you could even go much higher with a 5.56. You could even argue that a 55 grain isn't even the standard anymore for 5.56. Things have gotten a lot heavier. But I don't want to go too deep into the numbers. Okay, some thoughts. The next thing I'm going to say is that a 5.7 by 28, even in a shorter barrel, is not a 5.56. There's a significant difference. One of them being a resource I looked up, M.Carbo. They have a pretty simple breakdown, of the specs of 223 and 5.7 by 28. But the one that stands out the most is case capacity. Case capacity of both cartridges, it lists the 5.56 as 28.5 grains. It lists the 5.7 as 13.9 grains, right? So almost half, or about half. It's about half the potential energy if you consider powder, potential energy of a cartridge. It's about half. Now, granted, it's going to be a little bit more efficient in general because, it takes a longer barrel to burn more powder. So you're probably going to give up less going to a shorter barrel, but not that much less, not double, right? So, 5.7 by 28 is a decent PDW round. It was designed as a PDW round, but lest we forget, the PS90 was designed to be a full auto PDW. It wasn't designed for round per round effectiveness. It was designed to be really controllable in full auto. And if you've ever shot a bit of full auto, which I have, in general, I'm going to tell you it's a waste of time and money, unless it's like a belt-fed bipod or tripod-mounted crew serve weapon, like a 240 Golf, like a medium machine gun, a heavy machine gun. Those are meant to be machine guns full auto. Usually a shoulder-fired weapon in full auto is probably worse. You should probably just keep it in semi-auto and shoot it in semi-auto the vast majority of the time. The PS90, a little bit different. One of the reasons they designed that to be a very light, low recoil cartridge is because it was designed to be shot in full auto with 50-round mags in a full auto shoulder-fired weapon. And I think in that guise, it would be phenomenal. But you and I can't have that. So that's off the table. You're looking at 1 round per 1 round if you're doing, slower aimed fire. So that is something to consider. I'm not saying it's a bad round, but what I am saying is even in a PDW, it's not 5.56. So don't pretend it's 5.56. Even if you're looking at comparable velocities, you're looking at a much lighter projectile. So it's not 5.56. That said, it's probably more efficient. So there is something to be said for efficiency. You should research it for yourself, but just talking through it here. Okay, my thoughts on the 5.56 in the shorter barrel. Generally, it's designed for the longer barrels. Now, because of the Hague Convention, which we didn't sign, but we generally go by anyway, a lot of the military rounds are full metal jackets in a 5.56 or 223, which, despite them being full metal jackets, something like an XM193, which is a 55 grain full metal jacket, they can do pretty well out of a rifle because they're going so fast they can fragment and tumble. And even though they're a full metal jacket, they're going at such high velocity they can fragment or tumble and do pretty decent damage for what they are, for a cheap full metal jacket round. I would not count on that in a PDW. I would not count on that in something with a much shorter barrel because it may not have the energy to fragment or tumble, in which case you're doing way, way less damage than you might think. But for that, on the civilian side, there is a lot more ammunition types available. There are hollow points, like actual hollow points. There are varmint bullets, which are designed to have dramatic expansion out of a rifle, shooting something like a prairie dog out of a 24-inch barrel. But you may see decent results with something like a 50 grain or a 55 grain Hornady VMAX out of a PDW. It's not going to fragment nearly as much as out of a 24-inch barrel, but it may do significantly more damage than you would do, obviously, than a full metal jacket. And you may still get decent penetration because you're not going to get, just like the handgun hollow points or a balance, you're not going to get as rapid of an expansion because you are getting less velocity. So you may get sufficient penetration and decent expansion out of a PDW and a 5.56 with a shorter barrel if you use the right ammo. That's a lot of ifs that you, their shooter, have to test. Not some gun tuber told me, but you should test out of your gun, out of your barrel, one, that it's reliable, and two, one, that it's reliable, two, that it shoots point of aim, point of impact, three, that you can afford to train with it, and four, that it's going to do decent terminally, which means you're going to have to do some testing, which is a lot on your end. I have a load like that for my my short-barreled AR, which does really well, and I've tested all those things. But that's work that you have to do. I'm going to be honest, a lot of people don't do that work. They just think, oh, this box of ammo's got a cool hologram on it, or so-and-so said it was a sweet round, even though they're shooting out of a 16-inch gun, so you put it in your 10.5 and think you're good to go. You're not good to go. You may be good to go, but it's untested. Don't trust your life to anything unproven. Don't be a beta tester in a gunfight. So those are some thoughts there. Some other thoughts on PDW ballistics. 9mm ammo is cheaper. It's quite a bit cheaper than 5.56 ammo. Both are probably the cheapest in their centerfire realm, right? 9mm is the cheapest centerfire handgun round, and 5.56 is probably by far going to, well, I don't know by far, but it's probably going to be your most affordable, unless you run on some crazy sale of like 8mm Mauser somewhere, but probably going to be your most affordable common centerfire rifle round. Even so, you're probably looking at about double-ish, and I've been doing a bit of shopping to buy some ammo before the prices go up, and it's probably about double. Training is important. What's your ammo budget, right? So you can probably practice about twice as much with the handgun caliber P.D.W. than you're going to be able to practice for the same amount of money with a 5.56. And that's even more true if you're talking about those specialty P.D.W. rounds. Now, you could do even more research and get a full metal jacket round and like a frangible or varmint style round that shoots the same point of aim, point of impact. But you got to find all that out, which requires you to buy several boxes of different kinds of ammo, which adds up pretty quick. Ask me how I know. Where was I? So you're going to be able to train more with the handgun round. Now, you do lose quite a bit of velocity if you're talking about short-barreled 5.56. It's still more powerful, in my opinion, if you choose the right ammo. If you choose the wrong ammo, it's probably far less effective. But if you choose decent, well-thought-out ammo, I still think it's quite a bit more effective than a 9mm in a PDW, even though you do lose quite a bit of velocity. In 9mm, you gain a little bit of velocity, but it's very little. So you're still comparing a handgun to a pretty weak sauce intermediate rifle round, but it's still a rifle round. Even in a PDW, I think looking at the numbers, you do lose a decent amount of velocity, but you start with a whole lot more. So again, and ammo selection can make up for a lot of that. But again, training is important. So if you're not going to be the guy to do all the research and find loads that are comparable and do your own ballistics testing and do all that, you might be better off with a 9mm. And if your budget is on the lighter side, let's say that you have, $100 a paycheck, $200 a month for ammo for training, then you're going to be able to train more with the 9mm than the 5.56, which putting around where you need it to go when you need it to go there with the gun that you have, that's way more important than ballistics anyway. So the price right there, that's a big factor. And 5.7 by 28, going back to that one, the price on that and the popularity of that has surged in the last several years, even though it's been around since 1990. It's really surged in the past, let's say 5 years, 6 years, whenever. However, it's not in general, unless you find a sale somewhere, it's probably not cheaper than 5.56. It's certainly probably not going to be cheaper than 9mm. So those are some thoughts there. Also, it's nowhere near as common as either one of those, so there's going to be nowhere near the amount of loads or ammo availability as there will be with the other two calibers. It does offer probably the highest, well, out of a PDW, it'd be close, but it offers I don't know, I'd have to crunch numbers, which I don't want to do any more of that in this episode, but it's got a very high power to weight ratio, and especially size to power ratio. Like if you look at a box of 50 5.7 rounds, it's teeny tiny compared to the other rounds we're talking about. And if you talk about 9mm, because the projectile is what has the weight, and you're talking about like 124 grain to 147 grain versus a 40 grain bullet. Night and day difference between those two as far as like you're carrying 100 rounds of each. You're looking at significant weight savings in the 5.7. On firearms, really, there are really good firearms available in each one of these calibers. There are some really cool guns available in each caliber. There are really good PDWs in 9mm, all the way back to the H&K MP5 or the civilian semi-auto variant of that. There are really good PDWs in 5.7, the PS90 civilian version, and others. Something like the CMMG Banshee, which is also available in 9mm, and 5.56, right? There are a lot of very affordable short-barreled ARs nowadays. The AR market, we are in the good old days of the AR market. So if you don't have several really good ARs, like a good go-to and then a backup, I don't know they'll ever be more affordable than they are right now, especially with the price of metals and things going up. So that's a really good option for the affordability. A lot of the cheaper PCCs and PDWs and 9mm are going to be straight blowback, which it's a very simple system, but it also means you, in general, get a lot more recoil because you have a big, heavy bolt. The only thing really stopping that gun from blowing up is a big, heavy bolt, which means you have a lot of mass reciprocating back and forth, which in general is not great for fast, low recoil shooting. So if you want the best of that, you probably want a delayed system. And those tend to be pretty pricey, something like an MP5, something like a Banshee, something like the Springfield Cuna. And you're probably looking at more than a 223. These are just some thoughts. It's a Watt and PDW ballistics are a bit different, again, than traditional handgun ballistics or traditional rifle ballistics. They're kind of their own thing. So I thought it was worth its own episode. I hope it was helpful. I thought it was thought-provoking. For a lot of people that live in and or work in urban, suburban environments, a PDW makes a lot of sense for the modern world. I love hunting rifles. I like really nice bolt-action rifles. I love elk hunting on mountains, but most people don't do that, right? For most people that, work in a cubicle and commute in a mobile box to go home and sleep and repeat and spend their time in urban areas, a PDW, except for the handgun that you have on you, might be the second most practical gun you can have. I'd say the shotgun, and I would love that, and I would love if most people hunted, but something like 5% of the U.S. population hunts. So many people wouldn't know what to do with a deer if it was laying in front of them and it was already dying. They wouldn't know how to skin it and gut it and bleed it out and preserve it and all that stuff. So as much as I love the shotgun's versatility, a lot of people aren't going to be able to take advantage of that versatility. For the average, what I would say, urbanite, suburbanite yuppie, and I don't mean that disparaging, like young urban professional yuppie, that's what it stands for, which is not really a disparaging term. For the average yuppie, city, suburban dweller, which a lot more people are than I think would like to admit, just because you have a jacked up truck or you wear camo does not make you country. But anyway, for the average yuppie, the average suburbanite, urbanite lives in a cul-de-sac, the PDW may be, next to the handgun you have on you all the time, the second most practical gun. So I think they probably should have more thought and discussion than they do. So some thoughts on the PDW ballistics. Tactical tip of the day. Maybe a good practice to have an extra lower. Like you have X amount of ARs, you have X plus one of lowers. You always have another lower. Even if it's just stashed away, when you see a good sale on one, you see them for dirt cheap prices. I've lived through enough gun and ammo scares to know that stuff can dry up really quickly. You may not seem like it now when guns are everywhere and ammo's everywhere and everybody's trying to push you to buy the next hot round or the next cool thing. And guns are everywhere, but trust me, a very small portion of the U.S. population is actively buying guns or ammo. If that cranks up from 5% to 25%, that stuff goes away real quick. I've lived through it enough times to know. So if something like that happens for whatever reason, on an AR, which is a super versatile platform, it's so modular. It's not my favorite, right? There's a lot of things I don't like about the AR. I'm not an AR, apologist, but there's a lot of things I don't like, but it's very versatile. So having an extra lower that you can get right now for $50 or something, that you could, like, let's say in the future, like, oh yeah, I want to build a PDW. You can build a PDW. I just built a CMP rifle. Last year I just shot CMP, Civilian Marksmanship Program, high power service rifle. I just shot it with whatever, run-of-the-mill 16-inch AR that I had. But this year I built a more dedicated to that sport competition service rifle. 20-inch barrel, fixed stock, more akin to an M16, which maybe I'll talk about in its own episode. But that's just an example, right? You may decide in the future, I have this niche I want to fill, and that may come at a time where you can't just go out and buy an AR because they've dried up. They're one of the first ones usually to dry up. Well, the regulated part is the lower, and the lower is one of the cheapest parts. I mean, I'm talking big components, not like springs or something, but of the large components, the lower is fairly affordable. So, and I don't even know if that's true anymore because everything's so affordable on an AR. Barrels are so affordable, uppers are so affordable, triggers are really affordable. So, it's a very affordable component, and it's the regulated one. It's the one that's going to be regulated or dry up really quickly. So consider having X plus 1 for your gun algebra test today. Consider having X plus 1 equals lowers you should have. Number of rifles you have plus 1 equals the number you should probably have. Algebra. And your teacher said you'd never use it outside of school, right? Or your teacher said you'd use it every day. Well, whatever. Anyway, that's your tip. Have an extra lower. They're super dirt cheap and available right now. Next time you order a gun online, if they have a place that has lowers, see if they have any cheap lowers. Just have an extra one. Even if you don't want to build one in the future and there is a big gun scare, be a pretty good barter item. Okay, enough on that. Your tactical verse of the day. Part of Psalm 91. I shall not be afraid of the terror by night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that walks in darkness, nor the destruction that lays waste at noonday. It's part of Psalm 91. The whole thing is beautiful. It's good to have a couple of what I would call hip pocket verses that you have memorized. I'm not saying what you should memorize, but that's a good one to look at if you want to memorize Psalm 91. It's fairly lengthy, but you can probably memorize it. So that's your verse of the day. Scary things in the world, they're nothing new, but they shouldn't scare us as Christians. We're called to fear only one thing, and that's Almighty God and Him alone. If He is for us, who can be against us? For another bonus verse there. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.